Okay, this is a continuation of 8.1. This is question 8 on. We have very easy questions now because we have, instead of having fractional coefficients, we have the same thing except we have decimal coefficients. Of course, we know that decimals and fractions are the same thing. So all we have to do here is divide by the coefficient of negative 5.6, and I'll have the answer of x. So grab a calculator. 3.5 divided by 5.6 equals 0.625. Is that going to be a positive or negative? It's going to be a negative because this is a positive divided by a negative, and we know those are opposite signs. So we end up with negative. Here, I'm going to multiply by negative 2.2 to get rid of dividing by negative 2.2, leaving me with e. But I also have to multiply this side by negative 2.2. 0.75 multiplied by 2.2 is positive 1.65. Now I know it's positive because a negative multiplied by a negative is a positive. Question 10 gets a little bit more complicated. Now if I just use an easier question just real quick. If I said 2 is equal to 8 divided by what number? What number is x by inspection? 8 divided by what number is 2? 4. So we know that by inspection, x equals 4, because 8 divided by 4 is 2. But this is really, even though it looks like a one-step question, it's actually a two-step, because the first step is to multiply both sides by x. And the reason why I do that is because I understand dividing a number by x and multiplying a number by x cancel each other out, leaving me with 8. And over here, I now have 2 multiplied by x, which is an algebraic expression, 2x. Divide both sides by 2, and I end up with the answer I knew already, x equals 4. Okay, so that idea that when your variable is in the denominator of a fraction, you end up with a two-step equation. My first step is to multiply both sides by a. I'm left with 1.1 on this side and negative 5.5 multiplied by a, or negative 5.5a on the other side. Divide both sides by the coefficient to get rid of it. And a will equal $1.10 divided into piles of $5.50. Let's think about it mentally for a second. If you have $1.10 and you're making a pile of $5.50, how much of a pile can you make? If you have $1.10 and you're dividing it into piles of $5.50, a fifth of a pile. So what's a fifth as a decimal? 0.2. So if I think of it that way, I got the exact answer, but then I can grab my calculator. $1.10 divided into piles of $5.50 is 2/10 or a fifth of a pile. In my second one, I'm going to multiply both sides by m. Grab a different color here. 4.8 is equal to 6.4 m. Step 2 would be divide both sides by the coefficient. Here I can't do that mental math. I have $4.80 divided into piles of $6.4. So $4.80 divided into piles of $6.40. I can make 3/4 of a pile, and that is our answer for m. Question 12 is a story problem, and it says the average speed of a vehicle, s, that's speed, is represented by the formula speed equals distance over time. If Pablo drove an average speed of 85 kilometers an hour for 3.5 hours, what distance did he drive? So in this particular one, we have 3 variables. Okay, and actually I'm going to do them in different colors. I'm going to do green for s, d for time, and blue for time and d for distance. So if I think about this, in A, we are going to start with the time, which is 3.75, because that's the time. And if I think about speed, which is green, this is my speed. The one I don't know is the distance that he drove. So what we have to do here is we just have to take our formula, speed equals distance over time, and substitute the things we know. So we know the speed is 85 kilometers per hour. We do not know the distance, so we're going to leave that as a variable. And our time is 3.75 hours. Now it's important to note that there is no, these numbers will work in the formula because my time units in both my rate of speed and my hours is both and my time is both hours, so I don't have to convert some. Sometimes they might trick you by saying like per minute or something, and at which point you have to make a conversion. But here we don't have to. Once we have that, so here what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 3.75. And that's going to allow us to isolate the D. And then I just grab my calculator, and if it's 85 kilometers an hour, multiplied by 1 hour would be 85, multiplied by 2 would be 170, but multiplied by 3.75 hours is 318.75. I know, for 3 point. Right. Question B, this time we have our distance. I'll use yellow for distance again. That's how far they went. And the speed, which is green, is 95 kilometers an hour. The one we do not know is how much time did it take. So we don't know our blue. So again, write your formula. Speed equals distance over time. Substitute what you know. So I know my speed is 95. I know the distance. I know the distance is 95. No, sorry, it's not. It's 152. And I do not know the time. Okay. So here we have the opposite of what we had in the first question, because now our variable is in our denominator. So from the experience that we had in the last question, our first step is going to be multiplying both sides by t. And that's going to get rid of the denominator variable, leaving me with 152 on this side and 95t, or 95 times t, on the other side. Step 2 is to divide both sides by 95. And t will equal 152 divided by 95 equals 1.6. So remember, we're talking about what units? We're talking about hours. So therefore, it will take 1.6 hours. Now, let's think about this for a second. 0.6 hours. Well, 0.1 hours is equal to 6 minutes, because there's 60 minutes in an hour. So 0.5 hours would be 30 minutes. And therefore 0.6 hours is equal to 36 minutes. Does that make sense to everyone? If you think about 0.5 hours, a half an hour, how many minutes is half an hour? 30. And 0.1 hour, a tenth of an hour. If an hour is 60 minutes, then a tenth of an hour would be 6 minutes. So therefore, a tenth of an hour plus a half an hour is 0.6 hours, which is equal to 36 minutes. So it would take 1 hour, and 36 minutes. Okay, hang on a second. Hang on. Question 13, we start getting into our real complicated-ish story problems, but they're not complicated, are they, Kennedy? No. We said a roll of nickels is worth $2. Write and solve an equation to determine the number of nickels in a quart in a roll. So the first thing, if I had 2 nickels, what I would do is I would take the value of a nickel and I would multiply it by 2 to get its value of 10 cents. So this is the thinking that needs to go on. What am I doing here with the number of nickels I have to get its value? And I'm multiplying the number of nickels I have by 0.05 to get its value, right? So if I don't know how many nickels are in a roll, I still know that I'm going to be multiplying it by 0.05 to get its value. And it tells me the value already. It says, if you take the number of nickels and multiply it by a nickel, it'll give the value of $2. So here, I'm going to divide by 0.05 and divide by 0.05. And because I set it up algebraically, this should tell me how many nickels are in a quarter. So 2 divided by a nickel. It means there are 40 nickels in a roll. Okay? I forgot something very important. X equals the number of nickels. I forgot to define my variable, the number of nickels. That's step 1 all the time, is define your variable, make your equation, solve your equation, and then write a sentence. So therefore, there are 40 nickels in a roll. Okay, here we go. Question 14 says, write and solve an equation to determine the side length S of a square with a perimeter of 25.8. So like all of our story problems, if you have the ability to draw it, you should. And this is what we have for a picture, okay? So it says write and solve an equation. So there are two ways you could do it. You could say side plus side plus side plus side equals perimeter, right? Or you can realize that repeated addition is multiplication. So 4 multiplied by the side length equals the perimeter. That would be a formula for the perimeter of a square because there are 4 equal side lengths, okay? Now, since we know that the perimeter, P, is equal to 25.8, I can write that formula and just substitute 25.8 for perimeter. So now I have my equation. I now have it substituted, so I have a very simple one-step algebraic equation I could isolate the variable for to determine the side length. So now I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient of 4, and S will tell me the perimeter. 25.8 divided by 4 is 6.45. So therefore, each of these is 6.45 meters. And 6.45 plus 6.45 plus 6.45 plus 6.45 is 25.8, or 6.45 times 4 is also 25.8. Question 15, solve without solving the equation negative 5 over d equals negative 1.3. Predict whether d is greater than or less than 0. So let's just take this. I'm going to change it to x because I really don't like using variables that are non-x's. I get much more excited when they're this. So let's just determine, without solving it, whether or not it's going to be greater than or less than 0. So is it possible that the x value can be negative? It is not possible for the x value to be negative because if it was, this answer here would be positive. So therefore, we know that it can't be less than 0 because of integer sign rules, that the value of x must be greater than 0 because it has to be non-negative. Question 16, another formula question, says the diameter d of a circle is related to the circumference. In grade 7, you learned that the circumference of a circle divided by its diameter, I don't know where the pi symbol went, but anyway, it's there, is equal to pi. Calculate the diameter of a circle with a circumference of 54.5 centimeters. So this time, I do not know my diameter because it's asking me to calculate it. So in my formula, c divided by d equals pi, I will know everything but the diameter. I know the circumference is 54.5. I do not know the diameter, but I definitely know pi because it's 3.14. So when I substitute everything I know into the formula, I end up with this two-step algebraic equation. And we know it's a two-step because my variable is in my denominator. So step 1, because the variable is in the denominator, is multiply both sides by d. You get 54.5 is equal to 3.14 d. That's step 1. So now I've switched my variable to the other side, and it's not a part of a fraction. Divide both sides by 3.14, and d will equal 54.5 divided by 3.14. The diameter of that circle, is that right? Okay. So it is approximately 17.35, but it says round to the nearest tenth of a centimeter, which is 1 decimal place. So therefore, d is approximately equal to 17.4. Question 17 says a regular polygon. Now a polygon, poly means more than one. So a polygon is really 3 or more sides. We don't know if it's an octagon, which is 8 sides, or a decagon, which is 10 sides, or a pentagon, which is 5 sides. We just know it's a polygon. So we know it has sides that are all equal in length. We know that the perimeter of this said polygon is 34.08 and has a side length of 5.8. So we don't know, what we don't know is how long x is going to be, how many sides our polygon has. Okay? Now, if it was a triangle that were all equal in length, since I know that the side length is 5.68, it would be 5.68 plus 5.68 plus 5.68, or more appropriately, 3 multiplied by 5.68. So I would take my number of sides and multiply it by the side length. So if I take the number of sides and I multiply it by the side length, if it's a triangle, this x would be 3. And therefore the perimeter would be 5.68 times 3. If it were a square, it would be 5.68 multiplied by 4. But again, I don't know what it is, but I do know that whatever it is, this perimeter is equal to 34.08 centimeters. So however many sides there are, I'm multiplying it by 5.68 and I get this perimeter. So if I isolate the variable here by dividing both sides by 5.68, I am going to know what I multiplied it by to get the answer. I'm going to know what the number of sides is. So I take my 34.08 and divide it by 5.68, and it tells me there are 6 sides. So therefore, we are dealing with a hexagon. Okay? So therefore, identify the polygon. It is a hexagon. Yeah, it's a great one. Question 18 says, one year, a student council sold 856 copies of a school yearbook. 4/5 of the students at the school bought a copy. How many students did not buy a copy? So what we don't know here is we don't know how many students there are at a school. How many students are at the school? We do know that 4/5 of them bought a yearbook. So 4/5 of all of the students. So 4/5 of all of the students bought a copy of the yearbook, and that is 856 students. So 4/5 of the number of students bought a yearbook, and that is equal to 856. So if I figure this out, I could either, actually, hold on. So I'm going to isolate to figure out how many students are at the school altogether. So I'm going to divide by 4/5 to get rid of multiply by 4/5. Okay, and that's going to leave me with x. Over here, I'm going to divide this by 4/5. Now, because this is a story problem, and I don't really want to use fractions, what can I divide it by instead of 4/5 and still get the same answer? What decimal would it be? 0.8. So if I change 4/5 to 0.8, this is going to make my job a lot easier because now I don't have to do any fraction work. I can just plug it into a calculator. And I go 856, oopsie daisy, 856 divided by 0.8 tells me there's 1,070 students at this school. Okay? Am I done yet? Great. I am not done yet, but I know there are 1,070 students in total. And if 856 students bought a yearbook, if I subtract 856 from the total number of students, I now figured out there are 214 students at the school who did not buy a yearbook. Our second last question, question 19, says a score of 17 on a math test results in a mark of 68. So on this test, the person got 17 correct answers out of how many questions were on the test? You don't know. So X is going to represent the number of questions. So 17 out of a certain score equals 68%. Does anyone know how I'm going to represent 68% here? Yeah, I'm not going to use 68 because 68 is 680%, right? I think. Is that right? Yeah. So I'm going to represent it by this equation. So 17 out of, let's pretend there was 34 questions. If there was 34 questions, what would the person's score have been? 17 out of 34. Would have been 50%, correct? Okay. So 17 out of whatever score this is, I'm going to figure it out by multiplying both sides by x. I get 17 is equal to 0.68x. My second step is to divide by the coefficient. And 17 divided by 0.68 equals 25. So how many questions were on the test? This means that 17 out of 25 was 68%. What score would give you a mark of 100%? 25 out of 25. The answer to this question then is 25 out of 25 would equal the 100%. Let's try another one. The last question, question 20, is a fairly tricky one. It says the area of Nunavut is about 4 3/8 times the area of the Yukon Territory. So one of the strategies we try and get you guys to use for story problems is drawing it. So I'm going to draw Nunavut, and I'm going to draw a smaller version to represent the Yukon. Okay? And what I'm also going to use for a strategy is I'm going to make an easier question. And this is 21% of Canada. This is X% of Canada. We don't know. Okay. So if Nunavut was 3 times as big as the Yukon, so to put that in perspective, 3 Yukons would equal 1 Nunavut. What percent of Canada's area would Yukon be in this context if Nunavut was 3 times as big as Yukon? It would be 7%. This would be 7, this would be 7, this would be 7. 3 of them would make that. So what I did was I took my percentage and divided it by how many times bigger it was to determine how big each of these is. Okay? So with a simpler number like 3, I was able to determine that Yukon would be 7% of Canada's area because it's a third as big as Nunavut. But the truth is, the actual question is Nunavut is 4 3/8 times as big as the Yukon. But the same thing's going to happen. I'm going to take that 21% or 0.21 and I'm going to divide it by how many times bigger it was, which is 4 3/8, to determine how big Nunavut is, or the Yukon is, excuse me. I just realized what I did wrong. Okay, in our practical example of 3 times, what I did is I took the percentage and I multiplied it by how many times bigger it was to get 21%. So if Nunavut was 7%, multiplying it by 3 would give me 21. So therefore, if the Yukon is X%, multiplying it by 4 3/8 will give me 21%, which means taking the X value and multiplying it by 4 3/8 will equal the 21% of Canada. Okay, that's the actual equation. If you think about it, taking this, if I'm isolating it, I'm going to divide it by 4 3/8 to get rid of it, which is what I'm going to do over here. Right? Because if you think about it, this is exactly what I'm doing up here. So X is going to equal 0.21 divided by 4 3/8. I'm going to change 4 3/8 to a decimal. It's 4 and 3/8 is decimal 375. I can get that by going 3 divided by 8, 375. So, complex question. 0.21 divided by 4.375 equals 0.048. Is this the right answer, by the way? Did I screw this up? So therefore, if I change that 0.048 back to a percent, the Yukon is 4.8% of Canada's total area.